Oh, hi. It's me. It's the consultant that you're usually emailing telling me that your MRP is failing because it's not suggesting what it should, or it's suggesting too much, or it's failing on the data. So I am here to talk about a controversial topic that maybe the issue is happening between the keyboard and the chair. And what I mean by that is because of these little babies. So I've worked with MRP for 20 years. I've worked with Infor. I've worked with GP. I've worked with Business Central. Let's be honest, we're in technology. Can technology fail? 100%. Could there be a glitch in some programming that was done? 100%. So I'm not saying that the MRP would never break because of a technology issue, but what I will say is that it often fails because it exposes bad data, or because the data is incorrect, or we made assumptions in terms of our understanding of what was happening on the item card, or with our dates, or with our data. So I just want to talk a little bit about kind of why your MRP is failing, and just give you guys some food for thought and a place to look. So the item cards are not ready for MRP. That would be the big thing. Your locations and your item cards are two kind of main places I would focus on. So one, your planning is really location specific. So if you don't have a location set up, you're going to run into issues. If you've got 3 different warehouses and you treat them all the same, you just set up an item card and you don't use stock keeping units to indicate for each of those locations how you plan, you're going to have issues. If you're missing lead times on your purchased items, you're going to find that your starting date is the same date that it's required to come in. Well, if you need to place the order 2 weeks before you need it, then you got to make sure you've got lead times on your card. If you're dealing with a multi-level production environment and you haven't calculated your low-level codes, what you may find is that everything is required on the same day, because it doesn't recognize that this is 4 levels deep and it is required to be done by the time its parent item needs to start. And that needs to be finished by the time your level 2s need to start, kind of up that chain. So missing lead times, things like not calculating low-level codes if you're uploading data, those are going to be issues. Things like the replenishment system is incorrect. Your BOM and routing isn't associated to the item card correctly. Those are issues that you may have. On the planning, people will often have their reordering policy set to order, because they'll say, well, I want you to give me a suggestion to place a supply order when I get demand in the system. Okay, but do you recognize that if you have anything on hand or anything required for safety stock, those things will then be ignored? Do you have a reorder policy set up as fixed reorder, but you haven't given your MRP the fixed reorder point or the fixed reorder quantity? It's going to fail, right? Do you have the proper stocking levels set up in your bills of material? Are you using phantoms or not? Those are things. So take your time to really go through, specifically on the item card, your replenishment and your planning tabs. Make sure that you understand what Business Central believes the use of those fields are, not maybe historically what you've used. So I'm thinking about like a max reordering quantity or a minimum order quantity. Maybe your idea of what that has been in your legacy system when you used Excel isn't what Business Central is thinking about it that way. A really common one, actually, thinking about that a little bit more, is the make to stock, make to order. So the manufacturing policy. A lot of people will say, well, I don't make this to stock. I only make it if an order comes in. So they'll set all of their items up to make to order, not realizing if they're in a multi-level production environment, it's not going to create one individual production order for every item that you are making. It will actually create you one production order with multiple lines that have reservations to each other. So again, that's one that gets kind of mixed up, I would say, a lot. So just making sure that you understand like what that looks like. Again, like BOM issues, you don't have the right BOMs associated. Maybe you've been updating the main BOM header when you should have been updating a version. So that's an issue. So those are going to be things. You've heard garbage in is garbage out. right? That's something that we always say. So MRP is probably not failing because MRP itself is broken. MRP is probably failing or not suggesting the way that you want because you've got a bad data set up. Okay, so that's kind of one of the main things. So the next sort of major talking point, I think, when it comes to planning worksheet or requisition worksheet or MRP is the process side of things. So I often hear people talk about, machine capacity and machines and scheduling, but they're talking about material availability or vice versa. So material planning is about material. It's about your dates. It's about your quantities. It's about supply and demand of the material side of things to make sure that you have what you need when you need it. Scheduling is more about work centers and when things should be run. Scheduling doesn't plan in Business Central based on whether or not you have the material. There's ISVs that can help you with that. And the planning worksheet looks at material availability and when you need it. It doesn't look at the routings and if you have capacity. Again, like ISVs can help with that, but just be very, very clear when you're looking at material planning. The whole idea of that is for the system to look at all of the demand that you have in the system and then look at all the supply and make suggestions for you. That could be creating new orders. That could be canceling or rescheduling existing orders, changing the dates or the quantities on existing orders or canceling orders. But it's not really like if it tells you that you need a production order on a certain date, but you already have capacity loaded, the planning worksheet doesn't suggest a new date based on that. So I just want to be super clear on that. Kind of along those same lines as well is your date management. So if you have people who say to you, well, I know those purchase orders aren't going to come in on time, but I just leave them. I don't maintain them. Or, yeah, those sales order dates, I put in when the customer wants, but then I can ship it whenever. Or production has a date, but they change it all over and they're not really going back and talking to the sales group. So essentially, if you're not maintaining dates or having conversations about dates, then that's just going to be chaos. If you're leaving purchase orders and sales orders and production orders with dates that are in the past, MRP is often going to put you into an emergency situation. And when you're in an emergency situation, meaning that, the sales order date was in the past, so it thinks you should have had a production order yesterday, it ignores things like your order modifiers. So minimum order quantity, maximum order quantity, order multiple. So that can be confusing for people. So if you have an organization that don't maintain dates, even though they say they are, but you can see in the data that they're not, or they're open and honest and just saying, it's too much for us, you need to look at a different approach. Because will the planning worksheet run? Maybe, not give you errors, maybe, but it's dumb and dutiful. It's going to give you bad suggestions. So that's a big thing I always say, right? It's dumb and dutiful. So if you have bad data in the system, don't be surprised when it gives you bad suggestions. Different planning strategies where you try and cookie cutter everything into one reordering policy, or you turn on reordering policies for things that they don't really need. So for example, there's this idea of Kanban in production where you let the shop floor decide when they're low on something that they want to make it, and then you report it back to the system after the fact. So you don't really have a production order and an assembly order in advance. You let some visual cue on the shop floor empower the people to trigger a replenishment. Don't turn a reordering policy on for that. Just manually manage those items, like I said, through a bin with a pull cart or whatever it is. But it's perfectly fine to say some of your items aren't going to have a reordering policy on, even though some do. Some items might be set as lot for lot because you want the system to recognize if you've got on-hand inventory or if you need safety stock. Other items, it may make more sense to set up a fixed reorder where you've got a fixed reorder point, a fixed reorder quantity, and you let the system replenish based on that. So don't try to do a one-size-fits-all for all of your items. If you have a mixed planning strategy, look at the planning parameters set up and make sure that they actually make sense. I'll get to piloting in a moment, but make sure that you're also piloting enough of the scenarios through with those different reordering policies on to make sure that it actually makes sense for that item. There needs to be a clear ownership, I would say, of your planning. So are you running it every night? Are you running it 3 times a week? Do you need to run your master production schedule for your sales forecast or your sales order top level demand? Get that lined up, make sure that's confirmed, and then run what's called your material requirements planning or your MRP. A lot of the times that makes a lot of sense. Are you setting up a job queue to just run at night so that you don't have the 4 purchasers and the 3 production people just willy-nilly running it during the day, because it will lock your Business Central environment as that planning worksheet runs, where it locks the records so that it can do its analysis and make a good suggestion. So you need to make sure that you don't have everybody just running it whenever they want. You have a clear guideline on when it's running, who's running it, what are you running, how are people filtering or using that data after the fact. But again, like, just if you're just going to let anybody go in and click calculate plan whenever you want, that's going to be chaos. Again, we talked about date management. We talked about just kind of piloting different strategies. We've talked about the data setup previously, and then just ignoring action messages. So the one thing I will say is the planning worksheet, it's going to want you to bring in exactly what you need when you need it. So if you decide, I want to bring in that purchase order a little bit early, and you don't set up something like a dampener period or a dampener quantity, then when you decide to make changes to how you want to execute and actually supply that, you're going to get the planning worksheet just coming up and telling you to move it again. So that's sort of another thing in terms of process, that if you know that you are empowering your users to bring in maybe a little bit more than they need, or bring it in a little bit earlier than they need, make sure you familiarize yourself with things like the dampener quantity and the dampener period. So if you're running your MRP and you're analyzing that data and you're saying, geez, this is a lot of messages, like, go back and look at your process and what you're actually doing and fine tune your item setups. So if you find that you want to set up a certain threshold where you're saying, you know what, they could bring in up to 50 pieces more than they normally need, just as kind of like a buffer, I wouldn't want the MRP system to tell me to change that quantity, set up a dampener quantity. If you know that they could bring in material, let's say 1 week before it's actually required, that's okay with you, you could set up a dampener period. So the big thing I would say just on that one is the system won't allow you to get into a situation where you're going to not bring in all that you need or when you need it by. So even if you're off by 1 day, but you will be late, the system will still give you a message and get you to address that. But if you're going to be early, if you're going to have a little bit more than you need, but you've set up a threshold that that's allowed, then go ahead and set that up. But again, be familiar, like, understand. So another good example that I see where sometimes the process needs to change is safety stock. So people don't always understand that the way that the planning worksheet works is that it will plan down to your lowest level based on what its parent needs. So if I have a finished good part and I also have safety stock on that part, I would not want to go and also put safety stock on each of my purchased or sub-assemblies, because it will just inflate that number. So if I've got, for example, a sales order for 5 and I've got a safety stock for 10, the system is going to tell me, well, you should create, let's say, a production order for 15. It's going to handle that on the lower levels as well. So you don't need to put a safety stock, let's say, on a purchase component on that bill of material, because it's already going to suggest to you the 15 that you need for that safety stock and for the sales order of its parent. So now what you're doing is you're going to get a suggestion for the lower level to make 25. Let's say. So it's just understanding where in your process, like, things like safety stock need to be set. And then as you're piloting and running through and as you're using it day to day, if you realize that the suggestions that you're getting are, like I said, way too detailed, and you need to find things to, like, combine suggestions or to tweak suggestions because they're slightly wrong, go back to your data and maintain it. Okay, so that's probably like my last lesson actually in this is maintenance. Like, MRP is never done. Your business changes, trends change, the market changes. So just because you've set up your MRP, it might work beautifully for you for a year, 2 years, 3 years. But as your business changes, or as you're starting to realize inefficiencies in the suggestions, be fully aware that you're going to have to go back and update your item card. And again, there's ISVs that can help you do that. There's now AI and different technologies that can help you with like suggestions on what your planning parameters should be. But it is not, I always say, it's not like a Betty Crocker set it and forget it type of situation. You want to make sure that as you're looking at your suggestions, because again, they are just a suggestion. You do not want to just run the planning worksheet, carry out the action messages, and call it a day. You want to look at the suggestions that it's giving you, and where they are inefficient, look at your planning parameters or your data and figure out how you can streamline. So an example of that might be your lot accumulation period. So you might find that you've got 3 sales orders, they're all for a quantity of 10 and they're due in the same week. And you might run your planning worksheet and you're like, geez, the planning worksheet's telling me to create an order for 10 on Monday, an order for 10 on Tuesday, an order for 10 on Friday. I think I said Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but you get the idea. So anyways, you realize you're like, well, this is silly. Like, my production person is going to want to know what they have to produce for that week of that item. And they want to just create one production order. Yeah, a couple pieces might be a day or two early, but that's fine because it's all going to ship out by the end of the week. Well, look at your item card. You'd have your lot for lot reordering policy set. Look at your lot accumulation period, and maybe it's blank. Change it to 1 week. Then what you'll see is that instead of getting 3 production orders for a quantity of 10, you'll now get 1 production order that has a due date of the starting date of that demand period for everything that you need for 1 week. Okay, so it basically looks at the first demand date and then looks out 1 week, and it combines everything into one suggestion. So that's one scenario where maybe you're too detailed in your messages. You might actually find it the other way, because maybe somebody said in the very beginning, well, I don't want all these extra messages, so I'm just going to blanket everything and set up a lot accumulation period of 30 days. Well, be careful with that too, because what you might find in that scenario is now you've got a whole month's worth of inventory that you have to produce. You're producing all of it like the first couple of days or maybe the first week of that month. Well, that inventory has a carrying cost. That inventory needs a place to be stored. So you might actually find that although it's really nice to have less messages that you think you have to deal with, or less production orders that you think you have to deal with, now you've created a physical problem. So you want to make sure that you're looking at what's physically happening on the shop floor. You're looking at the setups. You're trying to take what's in your brain and put it into your ERP system. You're running scenarios to make sure that it's realistically close to what you would actually want to do. But as you're finding that this is causing you a physical problem, go back to, again, your item card or your planning parameters and be prepared to make changes. Make time to do that. Make time to analyze, like I said, your business and the trends and what needs to change, and try and get ahead of it. I know it sounds like a lot of work, but it is mission critical, right? Because again, it's dumb and dutiful. It relies on the data that it's being given. So if that isn't correct anymore, or it's not planning optimally or whichever, then you have to be prepared to go in and look at it and make a change. So supply chain lead times change in the industry all the time. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but if it's something that's, 5 to 7 days, don't have a lead time on it of 2 weeks or 1 day, right? Looking at things like that. Looking at like your routings if they're updating, your bills of material if you're swapping out material. Like, just make sure that you're going back to your data and making sure that it's a good starting point. That actually reminds me of a bonus portion that I'll give you. This is especially important if you're implementing Business Central, but I think it's just as important if you're live. Make sure you are piloting lots of different scenarios with MRP. So you have locations, you have manufacturing setup, you could have stock keeping units, you could have variants, you could have item cards with different replenishments, like I said, if you're using SKUs. So it is pretty much impossible. I'm going to say it's impossible. You should never say never, but I'm going to say it's impossible to know how every combination would come together. So one of the biggest things that I would say is make sure that you're piloting your sunny day, like when everything is right, when everyone's maintaining dates, when you don't have things that are in the past, when you don't have negative inventory, all of that kind of stuff. Don't just pilot those sunny days, also pilot the rainy days. So start with everything turned off, like no demand in your system, no production orders created, no purchase orders created. Set up your item card with just like a reordering policy on it, like super, super, super basic. Then add a sales order. Run your planning worksheet, kind of say to yourself like, okay, I think it should tell me to make a production order for 10 for January 30th. Make sure it does that. Then when you're like, okay, what would happen if I added a second sales order for February 1st? Run it again. It should create me 2 lines. You might think, well, those are close together. Let's explore this whole lot accumulation thing. So then maybe you add a lot accumulation period. Run it again. Make sure that it did what you want. Then maybe you add a minimum order quantity. Run it. Make sure it does what you want. The idea there is you don't want to start with absolutely every single thing you think you're going to want turned on, because when you do have a problem, it can become difficult to figure out, well, what broke it? Like, was it the fact that I put a fixed reorder on it? Was it the fact that I put an order multiple on it? Was it like, you just don't know. So when you're piloting and pilot, make sure that you have like a very clean starting point and just sort of build your item card up, build your planning parameters, validate that you're getting the results that you want. Then start introducing all the crap that happens in manufacturing, like your supplier's purchase order is late, your customer decides that they need to expedite something, your production team says they can't make a date that the sales order requires. Run that again. Run your scenarios when your production orders are in firm planned. Run your scenarios when they're in released. Run your scenarios when you've got a released production order with no labor and with labor. Does it feel like a lot of work? It can, but you really, really have to understand how your planning parameters, how your setups, how your item cards, how the components, how your documents come together and what results they give you. Because again, especially if you've used other ERPs, and I'll be honest, because I've used other ERPs where I've seen planning, sometimes I come in with this preconceived notion about what it is that I think is going to happen. Come to find that it just doesn't, right? So maybe it does everything that you expect. You love the way it works. Great. But maybe you don't. And you just need to be aware of that. So that is another thing I would definitely say. Make sure you're piloting. So piloting, if you're looking to introduce the planning worksheet if you've never used it before, but even piloting, sort of throughout if you're finding that your suggestions aren't optimized, if you're finding that there's been changes in your business, just make sure that you're going back to that. Because again, I've never really seen the system, I have never personally seen the system not do what it is supposed to do based on the setups that I had. So basically what I'm saying is that I've never personally seen the system be broken from a technology standpoint. What I've seen is the process break. I've seen the data be incorrect or the setup combination not being ideal. Not to say that that's never happened. Of course it would have, or it has, but it is just to say that it's 0.1%. I don't know the percentage, I'm being honest, but I do know that it's a very low number where it is actually the technology. That's kind of the main point, that your MRP is not failing likely because of the technology or Business Central or GP or it is probably failing again because of because of the data, because of some kind of process issue. So tons on that topic. Troubleshooting, it's always a joy, but those are just some places to start. Thought I'd share.